Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Dale Brumfield. He is the field director for Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Catherine. It's a pleasure.
So you've done many things in your checkered career. You're a writer, you're an author, and you have come to this issue of abolishing the death penalty.
Correct.
And explain to us a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
Well, like I said, you're right. I've had many careers, but over the last few years, when I started seriously writing, and I've published 8 books. The last 3 have been history books, but the last one was a history of the Virginia State Penitentiary. And in researching that book, I started reading about executions because they centralized them in Virginia in 1908 when they introduced the electric chair, and they started executing, and they executed about 250 people there at the penitentiary between 1908 and 1991. Reading about the backstories, and I researched all the backstories of the first 100 electric chair executions, and I was appalled at some of the things I found. They were mostly minorities, young black men, mostly convicted of assaulting a white woman, mostly based only on eyewitness identification. And then they were executed sometimes within 30 days of their 21-minute trial. So these things led me into looking more closely at the death penalty. I had just turned in the book's manuscript when this job for field director came open with Virginians for Alternatives. So I immediately applied for it, thinking, I have an encyclopedic knowledge of the death penalty in Virginia. I'd be foolish not to apply for this. So I did, and went through the interview process, and lo and behold, I have the job, and now here I am today.
Well, and I have interviewed Michael Stone before, who's the executive director of VADP, and there has been a groundswell I have seen over at least the last 4 years for more and more people and organizations in Virginia questioning whether or not we need to abolish the death penalty entirely.
Correct. For right now, and now this ebbs and flows quite a bit, but right now more people are against the death penalty than are for it. And that is a sea change from what happened in the 1990s, when about 75% wanted to keep the death penalty. We're at about 52% now want to get rid of it. So that is a dramatic change. I think what we're finding is that people are less and less willing to inflict it in a jury situation on someone. An interesting thing has come up since 2011. There has not been one jury pronounced death penalty in Virginia. So we're now in our 7th year of not having a death sentence in Virginia. That's huge.
That's a real turning point, but we have had executions since then.
Yes, we have. We had an execution last July. A young man named William Morva was executed, and I was at the execution vigil down at Greensville Correctional, and there were a handful of us down there. Nobody was there supporting the death penalty. There was just some of us there protesting it. So it was kind of encouraging in that respect too. But what a somber and humble moment that was to realize that the Commonwealth of Virginia was putting someone to death just beyond the wall. It was scary.
Really, because an eye for an eye. I've heard somebody say to this, if somebody burns your house down, the punishment is not burning their house down. Right? So if somebody kills someone, when we think it's logical that we kill that person. That doesn't make a lot of sense. How much do you think the work of innocence projects throughout the United States revealing that people have been wrongly convicted and put on death row has really turned the tide?
Yes, it has. It's been huge. The Innocence Project has been huge in releasing and getting prisoners exonerated, not just from death rows, but in prisons in general across the entire country. On death rows in America since 1976, there have been 162 exonerations from death rows. Now, these aren't commutations, death penalty to life in prison. These are exonerations. These people were innocent of the crimes they had been convicted of, and they got released. That's 1 out of 9 on death row. That is a startling and horrifying statistic, really, when you think of the possibility of how many innocent people may have already gone in the past.
We know that. We at this point, looking at that data set, we know we have wrongly executed innocent people.
Absolutely,
and you
we have.
cannot bring them back once they're dead.
No, you can always release them from prison, but you can't release them from the grave.
That's exactly it. And I think, Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, has probably had a greater impact than any other book. But there's another one called Ghost of an Innocent Man,
right,
about the project in North Carolina, which is the only one of its kind. It's not just exonerating, it is this whole commission that came together in North Carolina to actually declare people innocent of the crime. And I was, when I read the book, I'm like, how come every other state is not doing this model that's in North Carolina?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is politically driven. Politics plays a huge role. And you mentioned an eye for an eye. As field director, my job is to go around the state and talking to groups and individuals. And I talk to a lot of Republicans, conservatives, Democrats, progressives, anyone who will listen to me, I'll talk to. And I hear that argument that comes back to me sometimes. It says, well, I believe in an eye for an eye. Well, I would ask that person, what exactly does that mean to you? And they always say, it's a call for equal punishment. And I say, so, like I said, the house burning situation is one. So if someone kills 4 people, that means we execute them and 3 of their family members to make it an equal 4 for 4? No, we don't do that. That's Nicolae Ceausescu territory. We don't go there. Right. To me, it's about just punishment. Justice is what it's about to. And if we can't apply it evenly, fairly across the board, then we should change the system. The death penalty is not fair. It does not apply it equally. Okay, it's a horrifying, corrupt, lumbering system that should have been done away with centuries ago, but we still have to deal with it because there are people who still believe an eye for an eye is an appropriate form of punishment, an appropriate maxim to work on. I would say, too, the Old Testament also says, thou shalt not kill, period. With no equivocation, no exceptions.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's the state or it's an individual, like don't kill people.
Right, right. Or someone would say, I'm pro-life, but I believe in the death penalty. I said, well, then I would say you're pro-birth.
Yeah.
And not so, you have to change your way of thinking. And now I also get the argument quite a bit, well, some crimes are just too terrible. They don't deserve to live. I say, well, you know what, in a case like that, someone commits a terrible crime, they don't deserve to live. I said, I will agree with you. That person may deserve to die for what they did. I just don't think we have the right to kill them.
Right.
Okay? The former executioner in Virginia told me in an interview 2 years ago that they shouldn't call it life in prison. They should call it death in prison because that's what it is. Once someone goes into a maximum security facility after committing a capital crime, they're never heard from again. The only thing they have to look forward to is dying. To me, that's a decades-long lethal injection of isolation, denied freedoms, and 24-hour armed surveillance that's not at all a natural form of life. So that is the same. And what that does is doing what the death penalty hundreds of years ago was designed to do, remove people from society who pose a threat to society.
Right.
Back then, jails were notoriously unreliable up until the 1900s, not only for the possibility of a prisoner breaking out, but the possibility of a lynch mob breaking in and taking them out and lynching them. Those things don't happen anymore. Prisons are airtight. People don't get out, they don't get in like they once did. That has basically removed the whole idea, the usefulness of a death penalty.
You know, you make a good point. And I think the other thing I'm intrigued by is people are coming at this, when you talk about conservatives and libertarians and why they are focused on this, you know, people who consider themselves progressive generally like to claim the high moral ground. But on this particular issue, there's so many facets. Explain what you are hearing, because you've been, as a field director, you've been going to a lot of conferences.
Yes, I have.
And some of them are very conservative and they're for groups I've never heard of. And the fact that you're coming in as a speaker, that they're interested in talking about this, what is their perspective?
Well, there are 3 conferences come to mind that I've done recently. I was at CPAC with a group called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty, which is a partner organization of ours, which is fairly new, based in Brooklyn, New York. That was an interesting experience at CPAC because that's all Republicans. The young people were almost 100% on board with us, the younger ones. Now, a lot of the older ones were too. Of course, there are a few who came by, who shook their fist and, did the same old vengeance arguments. But secondly, at the Young Americans for Liberty conference, YALCON it's called, which was just down the road in Reston a couple of weeks ago, these were mostly young libertarians. I would say they're 100% with us. In fact, the Libertarian Party of Virginia, it's in their charter. They were opposed to the death penalty.
Wow.
So that's huge.
Yeah.
That the Libertarians are there where everybody else needs to be. The toughest group I talked to, by far, was the Virginia Federation of Republican Women Conference in Richmond. I got more pushback from the Republican women than I got at CPAC and YALCON combined, which was very interesting to me. And I can anticipate the arguments. I know what anyone who comes up to me, if I'm talking to a group or an individual, I can anticipate what the argument's going to be. They're going to bring up the eye for an eye. They're going to bring up some crimes are just too heinous. One other thing they bring up that they're always mistaken on is, why should my taxpayer dollars pay for someone to be in prison for the rest of their life with 3 hots and a cot, and I've got to pay for it? I said, well, it's true. As a taxpayer, I don't like to pay for it any more than they do. However, just to get a death penalty conviction in Virginia, it costs 4 to 10 times more than it costs to put them in prison for the rest of their life.
And that's because of the appeal process.
That doesn't even include the appeal process.
Really?
This is just the guilt or innocence trial and the sentencing trial. There are 2 trials in a death penalty case. They both require more attorneys. They require more experts, more jurors, more, if they're sequestering the jury, they got to put them in a hotel for a longer period of time, times 2. All these things add up to these enormous costs, and who pays those costs?
Taxpayers.
Taxpayers do. And a prosecutor is basically playing a lottery with taxpayer money. They're betting on the fact that they can get a death penalty conviction out of these 2 trials, which could be overturned at any moment after the trials, which has been a huge waste. What's all that money been used for then? Nothing. And many of them are turned over after the initial trial phase. So it's just it's a big lottery that a prosecutor is playing with our money.
You know, I had not heard that before. So that's kind of a new perspective for me, is that because I would have said, well, it's the appeal process.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was so much more costly to do a capital case, a capital trial.
It's the 2 trials that runs up the cost so much. And no one realizes that. And the appeals process just compounds the cost, of course, because it's a mandatory appeals.
Right.
It's got to play out. In Virginia, it's about 7 to 10 years, which is the shortest in the nation, by the way. Some states are 20 or 30 years to get through their mandatory appeals process.
Well, you bring up something very important too. Virginia is known for the rate at which we actually executed people. We in Texas sort of vied for the title of #1.
Yeah,
so
we did.
When we come back from the break, we are going to talk further with Dale Brumfield about abolishing the death penalty and why.
I surrender.
All right, pal. Get ready for the day, buddy.
Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad. Do we have a gun?
What's up?
Do we have a gun?
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
Love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
Vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
I tried Oxy at a couple of parties. I thought I had it under control. I didn't know it'd be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth.
What to expect when you're expecting.
Like here?
A teenager.
Today, I'm going to show you how to teen-proof your home. First step, hide the car keys. Preferably somewhere they would never look. Challenges will come up. Be ready for them. Hi, honey.
I'm ready for the... Mom, you don't use mannequins in the mannequin challenge.
You don't have to know it all to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me tonight is Dale Brumfield. He is the field director for Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. So when we went to break, we were talking a little bit about the history of the capital punishment here in Virginia. And because you are a historian who has written numerous books about it, explain a little bit about how that history has made it difficult to move away from this in very modern times.
Yes, well, it has. You know, we do live by our history in Virginia. We're all about our history in Virginia, good and bad. Virginia actually invented the death penalty in North America in 1608. They executed a man named Kendall, George Kendall, for treason by firing squad 1 year after the settlement of Jamestown. And we executed the first woman. Her name was Jane Champion in 1632. She was concealed childbirth. That was a capital crime in the early colonial Virginia.
Color me shocked.
No kidding. And there have been several examples of women in the 16 and 1700s who were executed for concealing childbirth.
Holy moly.
Yeah, so thank goodness we have evolved from those days. Somewhat. In some ways, we still cling to that past. But we have, in Virginia, we've executed by firing squad, by hanging. We have burned 3 at the stake in Virginia. One in Orange, one near Stanton, one in Hampton Roads. And we have mentioned hanging, and we've used the electric chair and now lethal injection. We're always looking for a better way to kill somebody. We haven't come up with one yet. You're still killing someone, no matter how kind you think the process is with lethal injection. They just go to sleep, something like that. You're still putting someone to death. So there's still that problem of legacy that goes all the way back to the 1600s. But we've executed in Virginia about almost 1,400 people. That is more than any other state in the Union. We are number one across from history because we got such an earlier head start.
What a terrible distinction.
Yeah, it's a horrible distinction.
Terrible distinction to have as a state.
Yes. Now, since there was a reprieve in the early 1970s when the Supreme Court halted executions, but then they threw it back at the states in 1976. And then Texas got started. Now, Texas has been leading since 1976. They've executed over 500. Here in Virginia, we're tied for second with Oklahoma with about 114 or 115 executions just since 1976. So we're still actively doing it. And except for that 120-year section from 1962 to 1982, we have not stopped. We just keep doing it over and over. So one of the things that I looked at when I was researching my book on the penitentiary on executions was racial and class disparity. That plays a huge role, as you can well imagine, especially from the Civil War era all the way up until, and even into today. There's still racial and class disparities with the death penalty today. In Virginia, for example, today, in 2018, you are 7 times more likely to get the death penalty for a crime if you're black than for that identical crime for a white. 7 times more likely if you're black. You are also 3 times more likely in Virginia to get a death sentence if your victim is white, rather than if your victim is black or a minority. So that is racial disparity that is still alive, and that's a holdover from the Jim Crow era. Is what that is. So racism plays a huge role. Now, people say to me sometimes, they say, well, you can't say it plays a role now because since 1976, it's equally divided between African Americans and whites. 52 whites have been executed, 53 African Americans. I say, yeah, but African Americans only make up 13% of the population. Right. So factor that in. It comes still that 7-to-1 ratio.
They're overrepresented on
still
death row.
Overrepresented, not counting the misrepresentation in prisons. Right now, not just in Virginia, but across the nation. So all these things, this type of racism started just after the Civil War. Now, one other thing happened after the Civil War, too, in Virginia, which is very disturbing, and it went on through the South, too, was the convict leasing programs, in which in Virginia, the railroads, which were trying to expand westward, needed workers. Where did they turn to? They turned to the penitentiary and the prison system. So they started leasing out convicts to work on these railroad tunnels. In my research, I found they were dying en masse. And I noticed a large number of convicts dying of pneumonia in the middle of the summer. I'm thinking, why are they dying of pneumonia in the middle of the summer? Well, it turned out they were going into sandstone tunnels and blasting them, and breathing in sandstone dust and getting silicosis and dying of pneumonia. So, and shipping them back to Richmond real quick so the railroad wouldn't get credited with their death. They have to pin it on the penitentiary that way. So it was this evil game was being played back and forth with these mostly young black men convicted of these terrible crimes and who were sent to this terrible work situation. So it was this grotesque unfairness going on. And then starting with 1900, they actually, in the penitentiary in Virginia, started doing eugenics experiments.
Oh, I know. That is just a stain on Virginia's history.
It just compounds. You look at capital punishment, convict leasing, eugenics, all these things mostly perpetrated on African American men. And so by continuing with the death penalty, by executing, we are continuing that horrible legacy that started way back then that we just can't seem to let go of.
Let's talk too about people who have mental or cognitive disabilities being overrepresented. And they actually, I think the Supreme Court not too long ago actually had to rule on not putting children on death row for capital crimes. I think that is now prohibited everywhere. But the fact that you had to have a ruling so that you're not killing children or who committed a crime as a juvenile and you're not putting them on death row, that we actually had to pass a law about that. But Texas, I think, was very much spotlighted for the number of people in their death row that had cognitive disabilities.
Correct. We have a few in Virginia. The young man we executed last summer, William Morva, was profoundly mentally ill. He killed a security guard, 2 policemen, thinking that they were attacking him, that it was part of a conspiracy to attack him. He lived barefoot in the woods of Blacksburg, eating pine cones and raw meat for a winter. That's not what's a rational person does. And he committed these crimes. And actually, the daughter of one of his victims appealed personally to Governor Terry McAuliffe to commute that death sentence for Will Morva to life in prison, and the governor refused to do it. Yeah. So that was not closure for her at all. People say it's closure, it's not. But in the last 2 sessions of the General Assembly, we have been instrumental in trying to get a bill introduced in conjunction with other groups like the Catholic Conference, the National Association of Mental Illness, called the SMI bill. It's a severe mental illness bill. Now, what this bill is designed to do is to stop Virginia from executing those who are profoundly mentally ill at the time of their crime. Now, we're not talking about mental illnesses like alcoholism or depression. We're talking about profound psychoses which affect their abilities to tell fantasy from reality, such as Mr. Morva had. Paranoid schizophrenia, these terrible things. But that bill, unfortunately, has gone nowhere. In the last session, it was placed in the deep freeze by the delegate in charge of the Courts and Justice Committee, so it didn't get heard and didn't make it to subcommittee.
Yes, they like to kill them in committees.
They kill them in subcommittee. They'll freeze them and they'll freeze them out, and at the halfway point, if it hasn't been heard, it's gone. Right. So that's what happened. So Virginia does not execute juveniles. We have stopped that. We no longer execute those with intellectual incapacities, meaning an IQ of 70 or less is the benchmark. We came within 7 days of executing a man several years ago who had an IQ of 56 because he had confessed to a crime he did not commit. 7 days before his execution, he was actually in the death chamber awaiting his execution. The court allowed DNA evidence to be introduced that fully exonerated him.
That is just, if that does not change people's mind right there, I know that Virginia has executed innocent people, and they nearly did it again, and it was only DNA evidence, which has only been used since the mid-1980s.
Right. And it's only used in 5% of the cases. Shows like CSI will lead people to believe that DNA is prevalent. It's used in every case. It is not. It's only used in 5% of them. So the Innocence Project, while they're getting these 162 prisoners released for crimes that they did not commit, only 5% of them are using DNA. The rest of them, we have things like prosecutorial misconduct, which is huge. We have withheld evidence. We have the mental illness. We've got all these other factors. Or they're just innocent. They were just railroaded, or a prison snitch turned them in. These types of things. And so these are all things that are part of, it's not just mental illness, there's a lot of things that we're working, and the Innocence Project and we are working to this is why it needs to be ended. There's just too many variables and too much human Fallibility.
Well, you know, in the book Ghost of an Innocent Man, in his trial, and he was in prison for a crime he did not commit for 25 years. But by the time DNA came into being, the evidence from that crime, that murder, had been thrown away. It couldn't even be located because it was about the early 90s, I think, that there started to be policies and procedures about the retention of evidence in these cases. Up to that point, it got thrown away.
Right, got burned.
Yeah, crazy.
And that happened all the time. Joe Garantano spent 38 years in jail. He originally got a death sentence for a crime that he most likely did not commit. But the state of Virginia threw away all the evidence. So his death sentence was commuted to 38 years in prison, and he served every minute of those 38 years. But he is out now working for I think he's working for the Innocence Project. He's working, doing legal work. He's a brilliant legal mind. So he had to go through the whole thing. But he was another case where he was almost put to death. He was days away from being executed when Governor Wilder commuted him to life in prison, or 38 years in prison.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him because he's coming to your luncheon, which
Correct,
we'll talk about, which is on October 20th. But the fact that we have got more people being released from prison, and how do you make it up to somebody when they were when they are actually totally, completely innocent of something? They've served 38 years or 25 years, and it's kind of like, sorry, we made a mistake. Thank goodness we didn't kill you, so you could be grateful for that. But you know, you can't go back and undo the wrongful executions, and it's not that anybody's even going back to figure out how many wrongful executions there have been.
Unfortunately, we may not ever know that since evidence is destroyed after an execution. And plus the 21-day rule is up, so nothing new can be introduced.
Right.
So we will never know.
You know, and I think there's so many people who really don't understand the finer points of how innocent people can be wrongly convicted, wrongly imprisoned, and wrongly executed. But it is more common, way more common than I think people want to admit.
Much more so. I have a friend, Thomas Hainsworth. I interviewed him for a radio show. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison in 1984 for 5 rapes. Turned out he did not commit a single one of them. It was mistaken identity. Eyewitness misidentification again. He served 27 years wrongfully before DNA evidence fully exonerated him. He just didn't do it. So Keith Allen Hardwell served 33 years at Nottoway they used bogus forensics, which is another one that is getting a lot of people released. Yeah. He was convicted on bite marks.
You know, bite marks were also involved in the conviction for the gentleman from Ghost of an Innocent Man,
That's
right?
That's right, they sure were.
So when we come back from this break, we're going to discuss this even further, so please join us.
This is the story of a boy who is very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. It made him feel uncomfortable. One day, he found out he had something called autism. His family got him help, and slowly, he learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies.
Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.
Being a dad is an adventure full of special moments.
A cruise?
Surprise!
Unexpected moments.
I got this.
And even awkward moments.
Okay, Dad, thank you.
But every moment you spend with your kids, even the smallest moments, can make the biggest impact on your child's life. So take a moment to be a dad today.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. You know, but it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, you know, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we are talking with Dale Brumfield of Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Thank you so much for getting us up to speed on some of the history in Virginia around the death penalty. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening today. You said that the tide has pretty much turned. We haven't had a death penalty conviction since 2011. We haven't had a recent execution, although I think we still have people on death row.
Yeah, we've actually, in Virginia right now, we have 3 on death row. Now in 1999, we had 60 on death row.
Holy cow.
So we've gone way down. Now there's many reasons why the death row population is reduced so much. One of the biggest reasons is in 2004, Virginia did something very smart. They created what they call the Capital Defense Offices. These are 4 offices around Virginia composed of very good attorneys whose only job is to defend capital cases. Now what that did, some people may have the impression that that is giving the killer an advantage over the prosecution. It's not. All it's doing is leveling the playing field. So now defendants have just as good a representation as the prosecution that's coming after them. Because what we found prior to 2004, in a capital case, a court-appointed lawyer was being paid about $1,500 to $2,000 to defend the most complex case of his or her life. And we found cases of attorneys coming in drunk, falling asleep during the trial, basically trying their first case as a capital case. And they were completely unqualified to do it. The prosecution just ran over them, and so the person got convicted, sentenced to death then. Well, that's changed with the creation of the Capital Defense Offices, and they are doing a tremendous job, and that is one of the reasons why we have so fewer capital cases. Prosecutors are less liable to introduce a capital charge or make a capital case or the death penalty now because of the Capital Defense Offices. So it's leveled the playing field, it's made things better. So you couple that with juries who are less willing to impose a death sentence and a general public who is increasingly growing opposed to the death penalty. Those are the things that are contributing to the shrinking of death rows, especially here in Virginia.
So we've got 3, though, people who are still in jeopardy.
We do.
So tell me a little bit about the seismic movement that happened when Pope Francis issued a letter. And I've seen a lot of people say that they don't think that it's really anything new from what the Catholic Church's position has been for many years. Mm-hmm. But worldwide, a lot of people have respect for Pope Francis who are not Catholics.
Correct, they do. Pope Francis' admission, changing the catechism was huge. Absolutely huge, and organizations such as ours were very happy to see that because he does hold a lot of
he does. He's very influential.
Very influential over non-Catholics. But that being said, he is addressing the moral, spiritual, and theological side of the death penalty, whereas here on the ground, my job, we're still banging away at the nuts and bolts of it. It's a much different case. We have a governor of Nebraska, the Catholic. He recently sent a man to death, and he's after the Pope made his pronouncement. So it just goes to show that just because the Pope said it doesn't mean that Catholics or anyone else is going to abide by it. There's still so much work on the ground that we're doing. Part of the work on the ground that we're doing with VADP is we're partnering with many other organizations to help us out. We actually, VADP, we're composed of 2 people plus all of our members.
Right, so that's true. That's a small staff.
That's a small staff. We have 2 paid staff. The rest of us are organizational members, people who donate to us, and other organizations who work with us. Now, we work with the American Bar Association. We work with the National Association of Mental Illness, especially working toward the SMI bill. We partner with Conservatives Concerned, Equal Justice USA, the Tides Foundation. There are numerous organizations, both nationally and in Virginia. But our main base of support is with our donors and our members right here in the state. People who give us $10, $20, $30 a month, that's our base. And so that's what we function on.
And you've got supporters from around Virginia. I noticed that your board of directors also is representative from every area of Virginia is represented on your board of directors. And you've got some amazing people on your board.
Yes, represented, all of the areas of Virginia represented in all the political spectrum is represented. We have progressives, we have Republicans, we have libertarians on our board. So this is not just a progressive or a Democrat issue. This is a Republican issue. Our SMI bill has been patroned for 2 years now by a Republican legislator, Jeff Leftwich of Chesapeake. We're going to be introducing, hopefully, a bill addressing the drug secrecy laws that was passed last year. Try to pull that, make that more transparent. There's various things we're doing. We're working with Republicans. Nationwide, about 40 bills were introduced by Republicans addressing death penalties in their respective states. That is far more than ever has been in the past. So we are very gratified to see Republicans, conservatives, and especially libertarians coming over onto our side and seeing that this is just a bloated, cost-ineffective way of doing anything.
So talk a little bit about, the grassroots effort. Somebody might be living somewhere where they think no one else is interested in this issue, but there are places that you can go, like your faith community, if you have a faith community, because there are a lot of faith organizations that support your work. You host, I know I've been to the UU Church here in Fairfax and one in Arlington that have provided space for meetings for VADP. So it might be that you're in a church where there's a group of people who really are focused on this and you may not know it.
Right. I have reached out to many Catholic communities. I've reached out to some evangelical communities, some Baptist communities, Presbyterians, and I make myself available. I say, this is something that, people are aware of but don't always talk about. The death penalty is a very emotional issue, and some people are scared to speak up. They may be against the death penalty, but they can't articulate why.
Oh, I think you're right about that.
When someone gets up in their face and starts telling them why they're for the death penalty, they may just shrink away because they don't know how to answer. My job is to help them answer that question, to tell them, here's how you can articulate. And I don't talk about the emotional or spiritual side of it. I'm talking about it's the cost, the whole thing of limited government. There's no bigger government than the government that kills.
Right.
So it's about limited government. It's about the possibility of innocence, the racial disparities, all these things. So I'm not talking about this theological or moral. I'm going to leave that to Pope Francis and the other leaders of the faith to do. I'm going to tell them how to stand up and use objective, statistical reasons why the death penalty is wrong, why it needs to go away. And going around to Ruritan groups, Rotary clubs, libertarian groups. I was at a libertarian group in Harrisonburg last night. We had a great discussion. Republican groups. It doesn't matter who it is. I'll go talk to anybody, and I don't mind talking to Republican groups. I don't care how entrenched they are. I'm just trying, and I'm not judging anyone. Okay, I don't care if they're for it, against it, or on the fence, which most people are. They just don't know which way they are. I'm here just to give them the facts. And if I do my job right, they go home armed with these facts so they can make their own decision whether they want to support the death penalty or they want to fight to end it.
Well, you bring up something really important about your willingness to travel, the fact that people do belong to clubs and groups and communities of people where you would be willing to go and speak to them. Again, presenting the facts, presenting the background, talking about the history and the nuts and bolts and the economic case as well as the case for justice as to why we need to abolish the death penalty. You're easy to find, vadp.org, and they can reach out to you. So in getting a community together, I think we really need to talk about legislative advocacy too.
Yes.
Because short of something happening at the federal level, which was briefly, like you said, there was a hiatus in the 1970s.
Right.
It's basically, it was like abolished temporarily on all 50 states, and then they threw it back to the states, and now it's just a hodgepodge of states that do and states that don't.
Right, we have 31 states currently who still have the death penalty.
Right, and that's a lot. That's the majority.
It is. It's the majority. Right. Now, there's a moratorium in some of those states, but most all southern states, and of course here in Virginia, we do still have it. So, yes, what we're trying to do, when I talk to people, I say, look, there's a couple things you can do. Of course, they can always donate, but otherwise, they can get on a mailing list. And we send out an email every month just updating everyone how we're doing, what's going on in their zip code, and what they can do, what call for action they can do. We also have meetings around the state, regional meetings, Charlottesville, Lynchburg, Southern Virginia, some other places. They're on our website. And these are all opportunities for people to come and learn how to talk to their legislator, because ultimately this is what my goal is as field director. I want people to be armed with these facts and go to their legislator and say, you know what, senator or delegate or whoever, the death penalty is wrong, the SMI bill needs to pass, we need to work on abolition. We need to go this route, because when it comes from their constituents in their district, it has much more meaning than just me trying to talk to them. I can't even get an audience with these people anyway.
Right.
So when it comes from their constituents, it's much more meaningful, and they tend to pay attention. So that's my job, is to kind of show them how they can talk to their legislator. To make this happen.
So you've got the SMI bill, and people are thinking, well, the legislative session seems so far away. It's January and it's only August now. But actually, bills start to be drafted, formed throughout the fall. They are dropped in December and the early part of January. But legislators are working right now with their constituencies on developing what their legislative bills will look like. So for people who are watching this broadcast and thinking it's an issue I care about, go to email, call, show up at the local office of your legislator to say, there's a bill that's going to be introduced. It's called the SMI bill, and I want to talk to you about why I want you to vote for it, co-patron it, and why it makes a difference in our community. And so I do think giving people talking points, helping people to have the language and the arguments to make a solid case is one of the greatest things that you're actually doing across the state. Yeah, and we haven't had the opportunity to do that. Luckily, we got a grant a year or so ago that allowed them to hire me. And so we've never had anyone. God bless Michael Stone. He's been doing it by himself for so long, but he never had the opportunity to go around the state, except for the regional meetings, to really do grassroots awareness. So that's what the whole intent of my job is, to go all over. And I do go. I go from Abingdon to Winchester to Richmond to wherever. I'm on the road a lot from the fall on in spring. So talking to many different groups, many different types of people, seeing what the feeling is like. The feeling of a group in Pittsylvania County down near Danville is not the same type of group that you get in Winchester or in Roanoke. So it's important for me to get to know these people and to know how to address them, how to talk to them, how to just show them what they can do and who they can go to. I think that's true. I mean, it's a big state. It's an enormous state. It's a commonwealth. And driving around, because I was born and raised in Southwest Virginia, so I know that where I was born and raised is not where I live now in Fairfax. And you have to speak to people's value systems. All of us have a different perspective on how we look at things like justice and innocence and crime and punishment. And it's not something necessarily that you think about if your life has not been immediately touched by that. Most of us, we haven't been in a situation like that. Right. So when we come back from our break, one of the things that I want to talk to you about is, in the march toward abolition, are we actually going to ever get to a constitutional amendment to the Virginia Constitution? So if you're curious about that, please join us after the break.
So I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh, no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school.
Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me tonight is Dale Brumfield, who is the field director for Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. And when we went on break, I threw out the kind of big idea that at some point in our future, perhaps the Virginia Constitution would actually constitutionally prohibit. Is that a big, hairy, audacious goal somewhere in the future?
Well, it very well could be. I don't know with our legal team and our partners where we would stand on something like that, but certainly down the road, that would certainly something we may be looking at. Right now, though, we're doing a chipping away process, and we're starting with SMI, and we're moving to the secrecy bill, and we're hoping that in a couple of years, if there have been no more jury pronounced death sentences and no executions, that it might be time to say, you know what, it's time to end this.
Right.
We need to do away with it. We need to do away with the cost, and a cost projection would be done at that point. And I think we could prove that the Virginia Commonwealth will be saving tons of money by doing away with the death penalty. Brandon Garrett, who was recently at University of Virginia, wrote a great book, and the title escapes me right now, but his position was that doing away with the death penalty will actually improve criminal justice procedures. So using his book, he's made recommendations to the GA in the past. Using his book and his expertise, it could be something that may be coming up sooner than we think. We don't know.
It's true, and I think, to your point, DNA is not used as regularly as people think it is.
Right.
But the better science gets, and science is getting very, very good. The recent use of DNA in the Golden State Killer,
right,
solving that.
Right.
Every time you have, so let's just wrap our heads around this for a second. Every time you put an innocent man in prison or an innocent man on death row or execute an innocent person, the real killer has gone free.
Correct.
They're still walking around out there.
Correct.
Right? And so that definitely was the case with the Golden State Killer. I mean, all these years, this man has been wandering around. And I mean, he apparently stopped killing, who knows for what reason. But putting the wrong people in prison puts our society in danger.
Very much so, because what you have to think about, the law enforcement agencies, when they catch someone and they're convinced they have the right person and put them in prison, they stop looking.
Yes, they do.
So the real killer is still out there around. I mentioned my friend Mr. Hainsworth a little while ago. While he was put in jail, more rapes occurred that followed the same MO. But he was in prison, but did it get him out? No. He still had to serve 27 years. But it continued. It happened. So more women went through this terrible experience with them law enforcement thinking they had the right guy. So yeah, it's a terrible situation all around. So I don't know what the
answer is either. But mass incarceration continues to be a problem in this country. It is a problem in Virginia.
Very much so.
We need overhaul of the criminal justice system, and part of that really needs to be looking at whether it makes any sense at all to continue to have capital punishment, to try capital cases, and to hold people on death row and execute them.
A lot of people, when I'm out talking to groups, a lot of people seem to be under the impression that I care more about the killer than I care about the victim. But since I'm anti-death penalty, I must care more about them. But it's the fact that it's my compassion for the victim and the victim's family that makes me against the death penalty. Because when someone is sentenced to death, they start the seemingly endless appeals process. That drags the family through the crime
for years,
even decades in some cases. And how many times do you read about a family member who says, I just want this over?
Right.
I just want this over. But no, the appellate process is going to continue. And 2-3 times a year, they've got to go through it all over again. Whereas if we just pronounce them in the beginning, life in prison with no parole after the trial, done. They're removed from society. The family is not dragged through the crime again and again and again. Also, something else that happens with this endless appeals process, states run the risk of creating a celebrity out of the killer.
Yeah.
How many people know who Ted Bundy is, but can't name a single one of his victims? How many people know who Charles Manson is?
Oh, Charles Manson is classic.
Classic example of celebrity coming out of it. So that's the risk that's run. So that's completely unfair to the families. The other thing it does, it creates a class of victims by telling one family that, sorry, the murder of your child was not serious enough to warrant this type of punishment, while this family it was. So how does that make the first family feel? You know, it creates a class. And like I said, if the victim is white, it's more likely that the person is going to get a death sentence than if the victim is black, at least in Virginia. So there are all these disparities that are just, once again, just carrying over from the Jim Crow area that we just have to do away with.
And I think the most recent woman who was put to death, and I remember this case because she was convicted of conspiracy to kill her husband. She didn't actually pull the trigger.
Right.
But both the trigger men, by turning over evidence, were spared the death penalty, and she was given the death penalty. I'm thinking, how is that fair?
That was the Teresa Lewis case.
Yes, the Teresa Lewis case.
The only white woman to be put to death in the history of Virginia.
And she also had a very low IQ.
Yes, she did.
They were very impressionable, but the very fact that the two people who actually committed the murder got off.
The trigger men got life in prison.
And this woman, the conspirator, got death. That to me was just unfair.
Yeah.
Unjust in every way.
Conspiracy to commit death is a capital crime. Now see, in the mid-1970s, when the Supreme Court threw it back at the states, they had a benchmark of 3 crimes that were considered capital. One of them was conspiracy to commit murder. One was murder and rape, and murder and robbery, I think, were the 3. That has since it's gone to the states, that has now grown to like 14. Wow. Aggravating factors now in capital cases. This is what happens. It's a slippery slope. Once you start with 3, it grows to 14. If we keep going, it could grow to 20. It could just keep getting worse. Recently, and within the last 2 years, one senator in Virginia, or delegate, I forget which, was actually thinking of introducing the murder of anyone in any type of security job, either in uniform or out of uniform, was going to be a capital crime. So if someone killed someone in blue jeans and a t-shirt, if it turned out they were a security mall guard, it was a capital crime.
Oh, that sounds
Luckily,
like Virginia.
that went nowhere.
Yeah, that sounds like Virginia, though.
It does sound like Virginia. So those are the types
does.
of things that keep happening. The pendulum keeps swinging. Just when we think we've made some headway, there might be an election or something happen that the pendulum swings the other way. So we have to be always vigilant toward this and not let our guard down and say, well, the next elections things are going to be a lot better. No, we got to stay on top. The last election was much better for our cause.
Okay.
But one more election
and it
might be great, it might not be.
You know, that's why it's kind of like, to me, the big, hairy, audacious goal here would just be codified in the Virginia Constitution. Not an easy thing to do.
No.
But, that would put it to rest once and for all and get away from this political pendulum swinging back and forth and it changing all the time, or the list getting longer for who we can kill.
Exactly. It just puts an end to it. It puts a stop to it.
Yeah.
It puts a stop to everything. And then once they're one trial, one and done, then the person goes away and that's the end of it. Our prisons are airtight now. People don't break in and break out. We don't have to worry about the removal of society by killing them. We're effectively removing them. How many times have you ever heard of Lee Boyd Malvo since he went to prison? He's pretty much been put away. We don't hear anything anymore. So, it's an effective way of administering the judgment that the death penalty was originally created for.
So let's talk a little bit in the last few minutes about this upcoming event on October 20th in Reston.
Yes.
It's a luncheon. Anybody is welcome to attend.
Yes.
But you've got 2 very high-profile guests.
We have 2 tremendous guests coming. One of them, Joe Garantano. I mentioned him earlier. He served 38 years for a crime he did not commit, and he was originally on death row. Can you imagine sitting there knowing you're innocent and hearing a death sentence handed down to you? That's got to be a horrifying thought. So he's going to be our guest of honor. He's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. But our main speaker is
Mike Farrell.
Mike Farrell. I wanted to say B.J. Honeycutt.
I know, but B.J. was his character name on MASH.
Yeah, he was a character on MASH. Mike Farrell, a lot of people don't know, in California, Mike Farrell has been very instrumental in anti-death penalty movement for about 30 years now, which is sorely needed because, in California, they have over 700 on death row. But they very rarely execute. And talk about cost, California has spent about $14 billion on death row processes since 1976, and they've executed 13 people. $1 billion per execution is what they've spent.
Wow.
That's crazy taxpayer costs.
That is crazy.
So Mike Farrell has actually not only been an actor, but he's been very heavily involved, and he's going to be our guest speaker. And it's going to be at the church, I can't remember the church where it's going to be now. It's on our website.
It is on your website, vadp.org.
vadp.org.
That's right. But it is in Reston. And people are welcome to attend. As a huge MASH fan, it would be just exciting to see B.J. Honeycutt.
Just be with B.J. Honeycutt, I know.
But the fact that he has spent so many years, 30 years is a long time to be an advocate.
It is, and I'm astonished that he hasn't burned out on it, because it can be very mentally intensive work, but he has stuck with it, and you got to hand it to him, like him or not. He's done a great job.
So I would encourage that people, we have spent the last hour talking about why we need to seriously look at abolishing this in Virginia. The Virginians for Alternatives for the Death Penalty have been working on this for a long time.
Yes.
Very small staff, 2 people. It's a very small budget, but there is a grassroots movement, and you do have representation all around the state. So no matter where you live in Virginia, you're going to find civic activists who are interested in doing the same thing.
Yes.
And we need to be focused on how you reach out to your electeds so that maybe we can get this SMI bill out of committee in 2019.
I'd consider a victory to get it in committee. If we can even get that far.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been around since the early 1990s, and we were originally Virginians against the death penalty. We decided we don't want to be against something, so we changed the name to Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. And our alternatives is life without parole. I mean, that's basically in a nutshell. Now, I'm no big fan of life without parole, because I still kind of trustingly go with Thomas Jefferson's ideals that prison should be rehabilitative and reformative and penitent. Life without parole is none of those things, but my personal feelings don't really matter. Once again, it's all about objective statistics, what's on the ground, what works, what's not working. So we keep hammering away at it. Even in the darkest of times, we've just kept hammering away at it. But we're seeing light. The light in the end of the tunnel is not a train coming at us. We think it's actually light.
Well, you're doing, like you said, you've been at this 1 year. You've covered a lot of ground in 1 year. You're willing to cover more ground. And people should ask you. I'm assuming that you are available for keynote presentations. You will sit on panels at conferences.
I will.
There's probably organizations putting together conferences for the upcoming year, and they should consider maybe reaching out to you to bring your expertise.
Oh, absolutely. And we can get a real consistency of message around the entire state. So we're all on the same board. We're all on the same plane. We go to our legislators. We're all saying the same thing. Very important that there's a consistent message is going out.
And you've got some very high-profile people, too. Former Attorney General, I believe, of Virginia is involved, and the former executioner in Virginia is involved. So there's a lot of people who've been personally connected to this issue who are now on the side of abolishing the death penalty.
Very much so. We have a conservative sign-on sheet for our SMI bill, and Ken Cuccinelli signed it.
There you go.
Mark Early. We have a lot of conservatives who are coming on board with that, so it's very gratifying.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Dale. This has really been an eye-opener for me, and I thought I knew a little bit about this subject.
Well, you're welcome, Catherine. Thanks for having me.
And I hope everybody at home understands more about their efforts as well. Thanks for joining us.